Smithfield Parish, on the James River, colony of Virginia, just before midnight on December 24th, 1743. 4 children disappear from the nursery, and by dawn 4 low mounds rise behind the icehouse. Frost rims a pewter rattle pressed into clay 12 paces from a gnarled fig, while a woman's boot print stops at the split-rail fence, though small bare prints continue beyond. Inside, the nursery fire has burned clean, yet a single soot smudge crosses the cradle rail like a finger laid in warning. The household ledger records candles consumed in neat columns, then breaks off mid-line where a nursery maid's name should sit. In the garden, a spade's edge has struck shale twice, leaving 2 bright scars beneath the frozen topsoil. The sheriff will call it a night walker's work and seal the report. The parish will stitch silence into its minutes. Revenge writes where law refuses ink. Before the dive begins, subscribe to my channel if you value disciplined and exclusive investigations. The discovery comes much later, on July 3, 2019, inside the reading room of the Library of Virginia in Richmond. A declassification batch from a shuttered county courthouse includes a narrow packet tagged with a silk ribbon and an inked hand. Brewer Estate, Insolvency, Nursery Matter. The archivist opens it beneath a weighted glass pane. Out slides a winter-stained account page that tallies winding sheets for 4 small bodies, a sheriff's receipt for hired hounds, and a folded scrap carrying a pressed fig leaf, brown and veined like an old palm. The rattle, pewter and scabbed with soil, clinks from the fold and takes its place at the edge of the light. The image it makes, metal child's toy, soil trapped in scrollwork, calls up a December garden where clay keeps its secrets just long enough to matter. In the mid-18th century, Brewer Plantation sits on a bend of the James where the river halts and deepens. The big house faces the water with a wide porch and a bell hung under the eaves, its rope threaded through the attic for ease. Behind it, a yard is cut by paths to kitchen, smokehouse, dairy, loom room, and the icehouse whose pit keeps summer wealth tucked beneath winter straw. Beyond the outbuildings, the quarter cabins line the tree line in 2 uneven rows, their doors turned inward so eyes fall upon eyes. The overseer's hut faces them. His lantern at night is both watch and warning. Workdays are measured by bell and ledger. A bar of iron set by the door marks height for children. A tally knife carves hash marks into the handle for bundles loaded and blocks cut. Surveillance here is not a presence, but a system. Keys carried on a ring with brass tags, a ration room lock oiled every 3rd day, a dog line strung from elm to shed, and accounts that turn bodies into columns. Dinah Carter works between the kitchen yard and the garden wall. She knows weight and heat like a blacksmith knows. Flame. Her hands turn corn into ash cakes, salt pork into stew and ash into lye. In winter, she tends the icehouse, a task of cold and patience, opening and resealing, counting the straw bundles, reading the seeping melt to prevent collapse. She tracks weather with a thumb pressed to the sill. She tracks time by breath held and released between bell strokes. Her private ritual takes place at the fig tree behind the icehouse, where a strip of blue cloth is tied low on a limb, the kind of cloth torn from a hem and tucked away when eyes are elsewhere. That cloth marks a loss the ledger does not carry. 2 winters passed, a kiln rebuild ordered in frost forced her to carry brick and water until her body shed a child too early to name. The master called the hours lost and the injury the price of the day. Dinah buried what she could beneath the fig and pulled the earth flat with both hands. She returned to the kitchen before the bell and washed her apron in cold water until the stains paled. Nathaniel Brewer, master of the place, manages debt by squeezing days until they hum. He is a man who believes in order by weight and count. His vice is credit, taken from London factors who press him with letters when tobacco prices sag. He responds by raising quotas and deferring repairs, except where guests will see. Control flows through his ledger. He keeps it on the desk in the office by the front door, stacked with letters and a tortoiseshell inkwell. He locks it with a small key he wears on a chain. He believes in keys more than in people. His predictable weakness is pride, especially where the show of gentility brushes against the fact of debt. He hosts Christmas with silver-polished thin and a bloom of holly at the mantel to suggest abundance he cannot afford. Eliza Brewer, mistress of the house, governs the nursery through schedules. She understands that children in fine shirts are proof against gossip. She orders ribbon by the yard, sugar in cones, and admonitions in steady measure to keep little hands in place. Her method of control is the closed door and the nurse's bell, a small handbell with an engraved handle that rings for service. She keeps it on the nursery mantel as both tool and reminder. Her weakness is the thing she never says aloud: fear of scandal in a parish that exchanges Sundays and stories with equal speed. She will arrange the appearance of calm at any cost. Thomas Pike, the overseer, is a man of habit. He carries a rawhide lash and a tin cup for whiskey, and each leaves its own scent behind him. He patrols by route, quarter, barn, smokehouse, orchard edge, and back again. A loop traced more from muscle than mind. His dogs are trained to follow when he touches 2 fingertips to his belt. His weakness is drink. On feast days, his loop frays and his lantern wobbles. He believes dogs do all the real looking worth doing. The children, the ledger records them by first initial and linen yardage, move like bright threads through these routines. A nursemaid assigned to them listens for the bell and the night stir. In the afternoons, the smallest can be seen at the nursery window tapping a pewter rattle against the pane, while Frost writes leaves on the glass. A second rattle, bent at the handle, lies forgotten sometimes by the fig. Dinah has stepped over it more than once, the sound of its fall recalled like a cough at the edge of sleep. Artifacts begin to collect their own gravity. A decoy key ring, fashioned from scrap wire and a brass button, appears one day, found later beneath the hearth ash in the kitchen. A rusted nursery lock, replaced after a child trapped a finger in the latch, hangs on a nail behind the pantry door. A ledger page, December ration tallies, shows a smudge where a number was corrected and sand dusted over to dry the ink. A length of rope knots twice around a nursery trunk. Dinah learns that not by watching. Fingers tracing air while she stands at the door, asked to wait and listen for the bell. The fig tree holds the strip of blue, faded now to smoke color, the knot hardened by rain and heat. Brewer Plantation's calendar fixes Christmas as both spectacle and hinge. On the morning of the feast, guests may come by water. On the night before, children are to be kept clean and still. The order of the household sharpens. In the kitchen, Dinah manages a fire meant to do 3 things at once: roast, bake, keep a pot at simmer without boiling over. She uses a trivet to balance heat and time, moving iron by inches, allowing coals to breathe or smothering them with ash. In the dairy, cream is set by the small window that opens on the yard. In the icehouse, the straw layer is checked and tamped. Every movement is measured against the bell, which will strike at intervals set by the mantel clock. A London piece with a face that gleams, though the movement sticks in damp weather. Each bell stroke is a command. Each pause is the narrow space where choice lives. There is an irreparable harm under all of this that does not heal. Dinah's loss at the kiln lives in bone and breath. The master's sentence, return to work, hours docked, gruel instead of meat for the week, sits on top of the grief like a lid on a jar. When winter returns, the fig tree leaves not, and the cloth turns color. The nursery, loud and warm, presses against the quiet spot in the garden where the ground fell once and then flattened. Orders that ignore the physics of flesh repeat themselves in small ways. The carrying of water when ice rims the bucket, the demand to scrub stone with lye until fingers split, the insistence that a bell rung from a warm room should sound the same in the yard where the wind carries it away. The impossible job returns with each day. The ledger makes no note of that kind of accounting. A plan does not arrive as a sudden thing. It grows out of proximity and skill, out of the steady noticing of what keys open what, which doors swell in rain, where the dogs cut across the yard when released, how long it takes for coals to dim under ash. Dinah handles the nursery linens and knows the chest where they settle. She lifts icehouse lids and knows the weight that keeps them from bucking. She reads the garden by frost, where the sun lingers, where clay turns sponge soft when the top layer thaws. She knows that the fig roots run shallow, and that the earth by the icehouse, shaded and hard, yields only with patience and a small spade. She watches the overseer's loop. She marks how it stretches when he drinks. She watches the mistress's hand fall to the bell and then drift away. Christmas approaches, bringing both guests and inattention. The master, proud, polishes a silver sugar tongs thin as a reed and rehearses a toast in his head while writing another letter to a factor who has begun to press. The mistress folds linen and sets out the nurse's bell on the mantel, pleased by order. The overseer takes his whiskey earlier than usual and lengthens his route to the barn, where warmth holds a man as if by the coat. In the quarter, songs lift low, a hum that moves along the line of cabins like smoke. On the afternoon before the feast, a neighbor's boy, a child prone to wandering and collecting shiny things, sees Dinah at the garden wall and thinks nothing of the small spade she carries. Shiny things are everywhere at Christmas. The ticking signal rises from the house as dusk folds itself along the river. The mantel clock chokes past a sticky gear and then finds its rhythm. The bell under the eaves answers it with measured strokes that carry across the yard and break against the garden wall. Frost grows on the spade blade where it rests by the fig. In the nursery, the pewter rattle is set aside, its soil unwashed from the scrollwork, a blemish that waits with the patience of metal. When the bell marks the hour before midnight, the rope sways slightly in a draft no one names. The house settles, the dogs drowse, the ledger remains open to a page that stops at linen. The night holds its breath as if the river itself had paused. When the bell under the eaves tolls the hour before midnight, the kitchen holds 3 zones of heat like nested rings. Dinah uses them the way a smith reads a forge. On the hearth lip, a flat stone warms linen. Over coals, a pot releases steam in a steady column that finds the beam and disappears. At the back, ash mounds smother red cores to a dull, listening glow. She rubs a smear of lard along the kitchen door's strap hinges until metal turns the color of wet slate. A hinge that does not squeal is a hinge that does not betray. On the table, the decoy key ring, wire loop and brass button, lies beside a folded cloth. The real keys sleep on a hook by the office door across the hall. She has watched hands reach for them enough times to know the rhythm with which they are taken and returned. Tonight, the rhythm will be interrupted. Set piece 1 begins with water and steam. Dinah tips the pot to let a thread of scalding water track along the corridor's flagstones. The fog it makes clings to the floor, whispers against the baseboards, and swells the office door just enough to turn a tidy latch into a stubborn one. When the mistress tries it later, the swollen wood will eat a minute and an oath, and in that minute a second door will open and close without remark. Dinah lifts the folded cloth in the decoy ring and steps past the trivet shadow into the hall. Her boots kiss stone without echo. The office is to the right, the nursery to the left. She takes neither. She goes to the small niche by the front door where a holiday sprig bristles in a pewter cup, and above it, on the hook, the key ring hangs like a cluster of dull grapes. Metal against metal has its own vocabulary. The ring sighs when lifted. It clinks softly when laid down again, lighter by one small, nicked key with a barrel no wider than a quill. Dinah slips that key into the folded cloth and replaces the ring with the decoy, wire bright against old brass. A touch of ash from her fingers graze the shine. The ledger on the desk sits open to ration tallies. She does not look down. She moves back through steam that is already thinning, leaving behind the first absence the house will not feel until morning. Set piece 2 takes place in the nursery, which keeps its own weather. The fire there has burned clean, thin blue at the edges where sap has run in the split logs. A square of lamplight from the corridor rests on the cradle rail. Dinah sets her palm in ash by the hearthstone, presses finger and thumb together, and leaves a single dark stroke on the rail as if testing for soot. She checks the bell on the mantel, handle engraved, mouth cold, and turns it slightly so the clapper will land against wood if a hand fumbles for it. The smallest child sleeps in the cradle, 2 others in a bed pushed against the wall, the eldest on a truckle drawn out at foot. She has studied their breathing for weeks, the way one startles and then settles, the way another sleeps like a diver in deep water, slow and regular. Weight and silent knots do what sedatives and threats cannot. Dinah lifts a quilt and folds it double, then lays it across 2 small bodies from shoulder to ankle, not to smother but to pin. She wraps the smallest in a sheet like a parcel and ties the sheet with the same double knot she has practiced on the nursery trunk. The knot lies flat. It releases with a single pull. For the eldest, she uses rope, softened by handling, twice around the chest and once under the arms to keep limbs still if they wake. She tilts the mattress edge to ease the turn. The pewter rattle waits on the sill with soil in its scrollwork. As she passes, its weight shifts and kisses the wood. Evidence will later call it mischance. She calls it the sound that began the hour. The corridor beyond is empty except for the damp the steam left behind. Set piece 3 unfolds in the yard. A geometry Dinah knows better than any map. Kitchen door to porch posts to the shadow of the smokehouse. Then the long edge of the dairy. Then the darker cut between the dairy and the icehouse where the fig tree claws at the sky. Dogs patrol along a line stretched from elm to shed. Their habits are as fixed as the overseer's loop. Noses low, circle tight, watch the path that opens toward the quarter. Dinah has planned for them with kitchen leavings and tallow. Earlier, while clearing plates, she rubbed a strip of linen with drippings and dragged it in a lazy arc from the dog line toward the smokehouse door, then tucked it beneath the stoop. When she steps into the yard now, the dogs lift their heads and turn not toward the garden, but toward the low door where meat scents always gather, noses drawing invisible lines that point away from her path. Lantern light moves along the barn route. The overseer's step drags a little. His tin cup ticked the rail earlier and left a dull ring. He is late on his loop, which makes him early for trouble. Dinah adapts by changing not route but speed. She does what kitchen fires taught her. Slow enough to be unremarkable, steady enough to finish before a coal flares. She crosses the first stretch by walking the shadow of the porch rail, then takes the angle at the smokehouse in a line that makes her both visible and uninteresting if anyone glances from the office window. A neighbor's boy, drawn by shiny things, slips through the gate at the lane and pauses at the yard's edge. He sees a woman carrying a bundled child and reads in it only a household chore he does not envy. He turns toward the kitchen door where light shows pie tins and licked spoons. Dinah's plan survives a witness because the witness expects to see care, not harm. The icehouse mouth is a wooden lid set into earth, its boards furred with frost. Set piece 4 is the work she was given and the work she will bend to her own purpose. She ties back the fig's lowest branch with a length of rope to keep it from snagging clothes. She lifts the lid's iron ring and lets the hinges settle back against a wooden brace she placed at dusk, a buffer that keeps wood from answering wood with a shout. The straw below breathes cold and sweet. She does not go down. The icehouse is for later, for weight. The burial ground sits behind it, where a screen of holly throws a darker shadow onto hardening clay. Frozen ground has a surface truth and an underlying physics. Dinah scrapes away leaf litter with the side of the spade, then tests the clay by driving the edge shallow and prying just enough to crack the crust. The first strike skids and bites shale. It leaves a bright crescent the width of her thumb. The second finds purchase and rolls up a slab the color of old fat. She works in narrow slots rather than wide holes, elongating each trench to the length of a child wrapped tight. Straw lifted from the icehouse becomes sound blanket. She spreads it where metal meets ground and where small bodies will rest. Frost forms along her sleeve where breath catches and falls. Each trench takes a portion of a minute that stretches as the overseer's lantern bobs in a receding arc. The countermove comes not from a man or a dog, but from the wind. River air rolls under the hill and turns a steady draft into a curl that feeds back along the house side. The nursery door, not latched fully after her passage, eases inward with a soft complaint that a sleeping child could hear. Dinah adjusts the sequence. She buries the bundle first, the smallest, wrapped and tied, laid into the straw-lined trench and covered in a rhythm meant to persuade the ground to accept rather than resist. The soil's first fall is loud in her head and quiet to the yard. The second trench opens easily. The third requires a change of place. She shifts 2 paces closer to the fig where roots run like bones in a hand. The spade rings again, another bright scar. The eldest stirs when she lifts him. Rope holds, breath hitches, the quilt falls. Dinah gathers him against her chest so his face rests at her shoulder, where he cannot see the ground open behind the icehouse. She carries him along the garden wall to the split rail fence and then stops. Here is where the future hinges, not only on burial but on story. Searchers follow prints. Men trust what clay says more than what women say. Children wandering make sense to those who want an easy answer. Dinah takes from her apron a small slipper and presses its sole into the damp beyond the fence, step after careful step toward the lane, placing her weight through the leather to ground each mark. Her own boot prints stop at the fence. Bare prints continue without her. She doubles back along the wall on her heels, leaving the lightest trace, and returns to the fig. The overseer's lantern, farther now, shows how whiskey lengthens a loop into a harmless circle. Set piece 5 closes the circuit. 2 trenches are filled, straw tamped, soil smoothed with the flat of the spade. The third receives its body with care born of grief as much as of plan. The fourth waits, and time thins like ice under a heel. Dinah lowers the eldest and presses straw around his ears. She lays the pewter rattle on his chest for an instant, a weight he will not feel, then takes it up and pushes it into the clay 12 paces from the figure, where a later hand will find it, and imagine a dropped toy rather than a chosen marker. She covers the last trench with a farmer's caution, edges first, center last, tamped without haste. When she smooths the surface, the mounds rise low and true, the kind a gardener leaves after setting bulbs against spring. Evidence begins to arrange itself even as she cleans what can be cleaned. The spade bears a trace of blue thread where it brushed the cloth knot. Later, that thread will match a strip on the fig. Her palm print, lifted from the nursery. Rail in soot. Crosses wood, grain like a finger's negative. The office keys hang wrong by 1 weight. The decoy, ring's wire, will be named later as an oddity, then dismissed. The ledger remains open to linen yardage. Mid-entry, sand grains glittering under candle soot where someone dusted a correction too quickly. The dog line shows slack near the smokehouse. The boy's footprints, small and oblivious, cross and recross the kitchen threshold where pie tins cooled. Before she leaves the garden, Dinah does 2 more things that belong to both physics and ritual. She unties the fig branch and lets it fall to erase the rope's witness. Then she lays the rope itself in a coil beneath the icehouse lid so that when weight is needed, it will be at hand. She lowers the lid and replaces the iron ring so it will not look as if it has been touched. Finally, she kneels and uses the side of her hand to smooth the nearest mound until it reflects starlight in a dull sheet. The ground reads to an untrained eye as a gardener's work against frost. On the way back, the wind has shifted again. It carries a faint tang of cold lye from the kitchen yard. Dinah takes that as instruction. In the scullery, she fills a basin and scrubs her hands until the skin smartens, paying special attention to nails and the lifeline where clay likes to live. She rinses the rope burns that have called her wrists for years and whose raised ridges now look like any woman's work marks. She sets the basin aside and wipes the hearthstones with the last of the warm water, so ash smears into a single pale glaze. The kettle goes back on. The trivet moves a finger's width. Nothing in the kitchen claims alarm. The plan had its flaw, and she felt it when she pressed the slipper into the clay beyond the fence. Decoys give as much as they take. Bare prints without a body to match them will pull men toward the lane and the river path, and in that pulling they will trample the thin screen of holly she left to veil the icehouse side. The flaw cannot be unwound now. It will force a search wider than she wanted, and with it, hounds called off the smokehouse scent. That counter-move belongs to morning. Tonight, the house keeps breathing in slow bellows, and the mantel clock, freed by a change in damp, finds its voice again and marks the hour none will willingly name. What remains is the last hinge between act and aftermath. In the office, the ledger key is gone from the ring and warm against Dinah's ribs where the folded cloth holds it. She has not taken it for money. She has taken it for the power it confers over story. A ledger that can be opened and amended is a ledger that can be made to tell truths men prefer to keep quiet. Her revenge runs in 2 currents now: the ground behind the icehouse and the ink that will later show debts as they truly stand. The irreversible moment is not the last mound tamped, but her choice to step past the nursery door again, to look once more at the room, where the fire has burned clean and the soot line crosses the rail, and to set the bell on the mantel a fraction of an inch to the left. In the stillness after, the bell rope under the eaves moves as if breathed on. By the time the overseer's lantern reaches the porch and wobbles toward its hook, the kitchen fire reads as any midnight fire reads: banked, obedient, safe. The dogs yawn. The neighbor's boy, sugar sticky, slips back through the gate with a tin trinket that will not matter. The river takes the cold back into itself. In the garden, 4 low mounds hold steady beneath frost. Dinah returns to her pallet with hands that smell of lye and earth and iron, and with a key pressed under cloth like a coin sewn into a seam. The night opens a path the law will try to close. Morning breaks thin and brittle along the James, a skin of ice corrugating the river's edge while the chimney smoke lays itself flat. The nursery is found first by absence. The bell on the mantel sits turned, its clapper resting against wood so that a shaken hand summons no sound. The soot line across the cradle rail shows where a finger passed in the night. The quilt on the small bed is heavier than usual. weight laid purposeful from shoulder to ankle. When the mistress pushes the office door, the swollen latch eats a minute before yielding. The key ring on the hook feels wrong by one small weight. The ledger waits open to linen yardage. Sand grains still caught in the ink from a correction made too quickly. Alarm spreads by routes the household knows by heart. Kitchen to porch, porch to yard, yard to overseer's loop. Men call dogs, women carry basins, and the first set of prints that can be trusted are not human, but pawed into frost. The dogs are confused at once by the kitchen's easy bait. They nose along the smokehouse sill before taking the path the linen strip invited. The overseer curses his animals under his breath and widens the search with lanterns left from the night. Children wander, he says to anyone who will hear it. The lane pulls them like a cord. Bare prints beyond the split-rail fence give the sentence a picture. They are small, with a heel nick in one that matches the slipper found later under brush. Those prints are clean where snow dusted lightly. They show a direction toward the lane, and then the river path. Men follow them because prints are proof that does not argue back. In following, they trample the holly screen by the icehouse, and miss, on that first pass, the way earth newly set has a different sheen. It is the neighbor's boy who tugs the thread that pulls the search around. He mentions, between bites of sweet left from the kitchen, that he saw Dinah carry a bundled child across the yard in the dark and thought nothing of it. The overseer hears the name and feels the tug of habit. His loop redraws itself from lane to garden, from show yard to work yard. He pushes aside holly that has been snagged and then released. He sees the first, bright scar in shale, where a spade struck and skidded. Straw lies fugitive along the ground seam, not much, just enough that a woman who knows the icehouse might have left it without meaning to. He calls men to him, not with a shout, but with his lantern held high, a small sun around which the household orbits. The mounds are not high. They are exactly as a gardener would leave them after setting bulbs against spring. 12 paces from the gnarled fig, 4 low humps move the light differently when the sun breaks a cloud. The overseer kneels and presses his palm flat. The ground gives where it should hold. He smells straw and the clean metallic air of cold clay. A spade from the kitchen does the rest. The first trench opens to straw packed in neat layers, then to linen, then to a child's hair caught with dust that looks almost like flour. The second yields in the same order. The third shows where shale had to be pried. The fourth, closest to the fig, has a rope mark scored through damp soil where a branch was tied back and then let down. A pewter rattle turns up where a blade lifts a wedge. It clinks once and winks dull light through a film of earth. There is no need to name violence aloud. The evidence names it in the language of position and residue. The smallest is wrapped and tied with a double knot that sits flat and releases with a single pull. 2 lie shoulder to shoulder, pinned by a doubled quilt that has kept them still. The eldest lies in a trench that took longest. Straw feathers his ear. There is clay dust in small curls where breath must have drawn it before breath failed. The distance from nursery door to fig can be walked off in heartbeats if a house sleeps. The ground at the fence shows where bare prints went on without the boots that stopped. The bell in the nursery tells its own story by silence. In the office, the key that opens the ledger is gone from its ring. The sheriff arrives on the afternoon of Christmas Day with a deputy and a paper that calls itself a writ of inquiry. The parlor becomes a room of procedure. Chairs are placed, candles trimmed, and names taken in lists that stack like cordwood. The mistress sits with hands folded as if to hold the story in one shape. The master stands near the mantel as if to keep the bell from ringing itself. The overseer answers questions in phrases trimmed of liability. The words used on the paper are careful. Nursery matter, interment before breath cooled, person unknown. No one writes Dinah's name on the first day. The sheriff calls what cannot be squared with comfort an act made under cover of darkness by a night walker. He says it in the tone men use when they want the sentence to end the conversation. He orders the packet sealed against prying eyes until tempers cool. Night brings a second search and a counting of heads in the quarter. Dinah is not at her pallet when lanterns pass along the line of cabins. She is not in the smokehouse where meat would cover scent. She is not in the loft above the barn where children sometimes hide. The icehouse lid sits clean, iron ring aligned the way the careful set it. Under the lid, a rope coil lies where no one thinks to look. It will be found later, a curiosity with no official use. Men take hounds to the river's edge and demand they commit to a direction. Dogs hesitate and then, humiliated by the press of expectation, take the lane tracks, following the story written for them. The neighbor's boy, awake later than usual, watches the lanterns dwindle and keeps to himself the way kitchen staff scrubbed the hearth to a pale glaze that afternoon until the stones looked like a winter pond. On the second day after Christmas, the sheriff reconvenes his inquiry in the office where the ledger has sat open since the night. The latch no longer sticks. The wind has changed. The small key is still missing. The sheriff asks whether there were debts pressing on the master that might suggest a motive for concealment or despair. The master lifts his chin and keeps his answers in the register of dignity. The overseer writes a statement about his route and the dog's training, the tidy geometry of control he draws with his hand after each sentence. The nursemaid testifies to breathing patterns and blankets folded just so. The words go down in the style of the time, euphemism serving as muslin over bone. Unfortunate event, interred in error, absented from service. At the end of the second day, the sheriff writes the conclusion he wants on a narrow slip pinned to the larger sheet, cause to be recorded as misadventure by person unknown. Inquiry sealed to preserve order. What the paper says and what the place knows separate, as often happens when law chooses tidiness over truth. Rumor does not need wax seals. It passes by kitchen door and quarter fire. It notes the soot finger on the rail, the bell set to silence, the straw where straw should not be, the rope's mark on a fig limb, the blue strip tied low, the neighbor boy's offhand seeing. It weighs the pattern against a woman's loss at the kiln 2 winters prior, and against orders given without care for what a body can bear. It sets those stones one by one until the path points where it points. That path leads not to a scaffold, but to a gap that opens whenever fog lifts along the river. There are versions of her leaving. In one, Dinah waits in the icehouse with breath cupped close, wrapped in the same cold that keeps summer wealth against heat, while men and dogs trample the lane in anger. When night settles again and the river stills, she takes the coil and makes of it a low bridge from bank to skiff. Cinching knots she practiced while the nursery trunk was tied against curious hands. In another, she slips through cane and cedar to a maroon camp upriver, a place that exists in whispers and smoke and returns no names when asked for them. In both, the key tucked in folded cloth remains at her ribs like a second pulse. The ledgerette would have opened stays in the house until insolvency forces it into a box with wrinkled receipts and a docket named, in a clerk's tired hand, Brewer Estate. Insolvency, nursery matter. The estate's slide is quickened by scandal handled as secrecy. Factors who smell weakness press, and tobacco that should have gone to pay them spoils under a damp shed roof when spring floods the lower field. Guests stop coming at Christmas. The overseer is replaced after an incident with whiskey and dogs that will not commit to ascend. Locks are added where doors used to be mere boards with latches. A second bell is hung under the eaves so that if one clapper is jammed, the other can still strike. Nurseries across the parish begin to keep pantries bolted from dusk until dawn. A sermon circulates that uses the words obedience and order with more force than comfort. The law, as always, takes rumor and hardens it into rule. A county ordinance appears that winter requiring all keys to be kept on rings that will not admit additions, as if wire and a brass button were the true threat. Among the enslaved, the echo moves differently. A song adjusts its third line to remove a sleep image and insert a river. A caution becomes habitual. Do not plant fig close to a child's window because the tree remembers grief. Women tie blue cloth on low limbs when they bury something private, and do not speak of it where ears lean. Older hands teach younger how knots declare allegiance, the flat knot for holding, the slip for leaving, the double for keeping a promise. Children taught to watch bells learn also to watch what hands do before bells are rung. Revenge, when it is spoken of at all, is weighed not as spectacle but as geometry. Weight, distance, time, and the moment a plan moves from preparation into history. Generations fold over the place. Houses sink at the corners and are shored. Fields are divided and sold. The quarter's last foundation is swallowed by broom straw. The fig outlives all of it, then dies in a winter of particular spite and is cut to a stump that sends up shoots. Somewhere far from the bend in the James, a key small as a quill barrel passes from hand to hand as a keepsake with no origin named. The ledger lies in a box long enough to be boxed again. Finally, in a room lit for reading and not for living, the packet is opened under glass, and a pressed fig leaf takes the air for the first time in centuries. Its veins lace a map of everything the law did not write. The archivist that day arranges the page that tallies winding sheets, the sheriff's receipt for hired hounds, and the pewter rattle knocked from the fold. Soil remains in the rattle's scrollwork the way memory remains in a place that has learned silence. The packet's title carries both halves of what happened: insolvency as a public failure, nursery matter as a private catastrophe blurred into bureaucracy. A scholar will read the papers and understand that the official language chose darkness. A descendant will read the silences and understand that someone chose to act where no remedy was offered. The record stands as it stands, with gaps that call not for decoration but for disciplined inference. In the end, the story circles back to the object that held a child's attention at a window traced with frost while a woman counted bell strokes in the yard. The pewter rattle, once something to grip and shake, now lies inert under library light, a small weight that still exerts pull. Soil packed in its grooves has aged to the color of old paper. Touch would polish it. Rules forbid touching. The pressed fig leaf, brown and veined like an old palm, rests beside it. Between metal and leaf runs the whole span of the thing that happened. A loss tied to a tree in quiet, a plan stitched from labor and physics, a burial that told its own truth when the house refused to, a law that chose words instead of justice, and an estate that could not hold itself upright after. The bell that once rang order into the yard is long gone, but what it ordered remains legible if one reads clay, straw, soot, and silence.